Hello and welcome to the Risky Business Podcast. I'm Sam Stone. I'm sitting down with people who I have seen take big risks in their life. My goal is to encourage you, challenge you, and push you to take a risk, whatever that may be in your life. Risky business. Let's get risky. Here we go.
Put in work, got so much potential, it hurts. If y'all do not wake up, then y'all gon' get hurt.
Hello and welcome to the Risky Business Podcast. If you have listened to this podcast so far, you probably reached out to me and said, when's your dad going to be on the podcast? And I heard the question enough times that I thought, his schedule was so busy. He's traveling so much. Let's see if we could pencil him in with his schedule. My schedule's a little bit more free. So if you don't know, this is my dad. His name's Dave Stone. I am so excited for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming and sitting down, Dad, and being one of the avid listeners, one of the true first listeners to the Risky Business Podcast. So
I have
thank you for
listened
sitting
to
down.
every single episode that has been dropped. I love it. And I even brought my own drink with me for those who are watching on video. It is in honor of Brad's.
Oh, nice.
It's Celsius.
There
It was
you
that,
go,
or
yeah.
else I think Michelob, or I'm trying to think what the other choices were.
We won't,
I
we won't tell
chose
him what's in the other one.
I chose to just commend him for his great work with Celsius because this has caffeine in it. And now whenever I'm on a podcast, I drink it before.
It's a lot of caffeine, so don't
I-
drink it too late in the afternoon. Luckily, we're recording at 1 p.m., so thank you for sitting down. I'm so excited for this, and a lot of the episodes I've had early on have been specifically towards entrepreneurial risk. And
Yes. Mhm.
as you know from listening to the podcast, I'm excited as a believer, obviously, and as you, as a pastor and believer, to kind of expand on how risk doesn't always look like a business risk for every single person. And obviously, you've had business risk in your life, but I'm excited to kind of hear your story of risk. And we did not on purpose really prep for this. I didn't give him pre-planned questions or
And this
anything.
is true
This
because
is-
I asked for that. And
He
he
asked
said, no, we'll just
pre-planned
go with
questions,
the flow.
and
Go
I
with
said, we're just going to go with it. So thank you for sitting down. I'm excited.
Very similar to how you approached tests when you were in high school.
No prep, ready to roll.
No prep, just kind of go with the flow. Yeah, I'm proud of
listen-
that D.
If you listened to the last episode, you heard me talking about when I was academically ineligible, which
Oh,
I was definitely in trouble with
one of
you
my
for being
favorite
academically
stories.
ineligible.
Yeah, you're
But-
down there with the crutches, and everybody in the stands keeps saying, "Hey, how did Sam injure himself? How did Sam injure himself?" I'm like, dude, he's not injured. He's academically ineligible, and he's just walking around on crutches so that people think, "Oh, that's why he's not playing."
Yeah.
So I commend you. I thought that was an incredible idea. I was jealous, and wish I would have used it back when I was in high school.
But yes, thank you for sitting down. A little background on you, if you don't know, my dad was pastor. He's been a pastor his whole entire life. He's worked at Southeast Christian Church here in Louisville, where we record, and he was there for how many years? 30?
30.
30 years, and was senior pastor from, if I get any of these dates wrong, let me know. I think you started in 2007.
2006 through 2019.
Yeah. So was senior pastor there and led the church through, it's one of the largest churches in America, led the church through some massive growth, going to multi-site campuses, which was pretty early on in 2007, or when you guys first started it, was a pretty new thing. And you led to some big risk there for the church to branch out and to grow, not just in one location, but to serve a lot of more people. And then in 2019, stepped down from senior pastor to pass it off to Kyle Eidelman, and went from there to preaching at different churches. And then as of now, you have your own podcast. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, you've inspired me. You led the way. You're the first stone to have one, and now I've joined. So let's get stoned, right? Both
It's
of
not
us,
the name of his podcast.
although we did toy with that if we ever did one together.
We thought about one together called Let's Get Stoned. And I think the people who click on it would be
Yeah,
a little bit
little
downed when they heard me and you chit-chatting for an hour.
I think you're right. No, I just started a podcast about 3 weeks ago called Pastor to Pastor with Dave Stone, and it's where I just interview Christian leaders, have a conversation with them. And then at the end of that conversation, I'll tell a story that hopefully can be used or stolen by any Christian leader and used in a sermon, in a lesson, in a Bible study group, to train staff, whatever it might be. So I love storytelling. And so I thought, why not wrap up each one with that? But I get to talk to some pretty cool um, people who have done a great job in leading in a church or in a ministry or in a nonprofit. And so I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I don't know if anybody else is, but Focus on the Family reached out to me about 2 years ago, and the timing wasn't right, and I kept putting them off. And finally, we just started it, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
It's cool. And I think even for people who aren't pastors, obviously it's called Pastor to Pastor.
Yeah.
But if you're a ministry leader in any way or involved in your church, I was listening to the one with Lee Strobel on evangelism that you did last week.
Yeah, he was great.
And if you've heard of Lee Strobel, I'm sure you have. Case for Creator, Case for Christ, Case for Faith, Case for Easter, I think is
Yeah.
his new one he was
He's
talking
got
about.
50. I think he said to me, I've written over 70 books. And he said, but please don't say that. I said, okay, all right. So I cut it down saying, he's written over 50 books. He said, I just don't like the way it sounds to say over 70 books. But he was an award-winning journalist. He was a huge atheist and actually had a movie made of his life, which is really powerful, just going through his testimony. But you're right. The podcast is for Christian leaders or for volunteers who are deeply involved in the heart of their church.
Well, it challenged me just from listening to it on just the evangelism side of it and how it's not just for, you had a whole section talking about churches that thrive in evangelism are typically churches that are not senior pastor led by a pastor who's great at evangelism, which I thought was wildly interesting.
Very, very interesting, because he's and it's a perfect picture of how people relate to leaders when they show vulnerability and weakness. And what he was saying, which I think is good for your leaders, and you should think about from the vantage point of risk. It's when you pull the veil back and you say, hey, I could use some help with this. You know what it's like for a leader when they say that to their team and they say, gosh, you know what? I need to lean in and get some help from others. You're collectively harnessing the genius that your team has in areas that you don't have. And that's what he talked about. He talked about when a preacher stands before their church and says, hey, I want you to know I'm intimidated when I share my faith, and I get nervous about it too. And so I know that this is difficult for many of you to hear. I want you to know it's difficult for me as well. And so all of a sudden, now everybody relates to him because, I get nervous. I get intimidated in those settings as well. So
I think when we tie back to risk, and one reason why everybody asked me, okay, I want to hear your dad's story on this, is you led one of the largest churches in America, and between 20 and 30,000 people would come each week when you were leading it. And what were the biggest risks as a Christian leader that you saw that you took, or that you saw you had placed in front of you as a leader of a church, to where, I mean, it isn't a business. Obviously, we know no one's in church to make money, but in the grand scheme of things, you're leading one of the largest groups of staff and or people in Louisville, even in Kentucky, and you did that for a long time. So what were the risks that were placed in front of you that you saw in your time?
And a lot of times it's choices. David Novak, who was the leader here from Louisville, leader of Yum Brands, he has a great line. He says, every leadership decision is a decision between pain and pleasure. And in other words, what might be the decision is going to make some people happy, but it's also going to hack some people off. And so every time you make a decision, when I decide and say, okay, as a senior leader, I'm going to take our church from one campus into multiple campuses. And this is at a time when it was really strange. I mean, the concept, just to give you some idea, Sam, when you were young at that time, back in 2006, I mean, you're still young, but you know what I mean? You were a little guy then.
11.
And so trying to explain that to the congregation, that I would be preaching from one place and then people would be watching it at another campus on a screen, it was a real disconnect for people. I remember one person coming up and asking me, said, okay, so at the main campus here at Blankenbaker, we're going to start all these other campuses. Does that mean that in a few years we won't even meet here at Blankenbaker? I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. We'll still have that, which just shows I didn't do the greatest job of explaining it. But
Well, if you remember at the time, it was 2006. That
yeah,
was like iPhone wasn't even out yet. It was right around that time, I think, was the iPhone,
yeah.
and maybe 2007, 2008 was the iPhone. So it wasn't technology was very different then than it was
Oh,
today.
yeah.
And so even watching a screen from afar, I remember the first Indiana campus,
Mhm.
the people would come in the back and you'd tell the story of people not even knowing they were watching a screen.
Yeah, and they would come afterwards and say, "I want to meet Dave," and they'd say, "Well, Dave's over in Louisville." I said, "Well, he was just here just a minute ago. Is he on his way there?" Well, no, he was actually there. And there's little tricks of the trade that you do. We're actually 8 feet tall on the screens, but 6 foot in real life, but it's 8 foot on the screen, makes it a little bigger. And the picture is so sharp and it keeps getting better with new generations of technology. But my point would be the risk was to do something so different that we would be willing to try it as leaders, and then that the congregation would embrace that. And there were some places, a few other places that had done it, so that made it easier to point to that. But people saying, and that question mark looming of, oh, will people really watch a screen? Will they
Mhm.
really watch a screen? And I'll never forget, because that was in, Sam, I think we opened up an Indiana campus at the end of 2007 or early 2008, probably
Mhm.
2008, because we built it from the ground up. And so think of 2008 all the way to COVID,
Mhm.
2020. The week before COVID, I don't know if you know this, the week before COVID, we had the same number of people at all the other campuses as we had at Blankenbaker.
Oh, wow.
And that was the very first time. So
That's cool.
the answer, will people watch a screen? Evidently they will.
Yeah, more people are watching screens now of the
Oh,
messages
yeah.
than I mean, we watch it every week. We go to the Shelby County campus and it's like
Yeah.
you kind of obviously there's pros and cons to seeing it in person, and the worship at Blankenbaker is a
Yeah.
little bit more you feel wise as you walk in. It's like, wow, this is amazing.
I
But the
mean, you
worship
have a
everywhere, there's pros and cons. You don't have an
exactly.
hour of
And there's
traffic.
people
So
who have different, I always tell people, man, if you want a more intimate setting, the multi-sites will give you more of the intimate setting. If you like the feel of a big church and there's, something, then you can come to Blankenbaker. And there's not a right or wrong. There's not a one size fits all. There are plenty of people that drive past all sorts of multi-site campuses that Southeast has, and because they want to go to Blankenbaker. And there
mhm.
are others that say, why would I fight the traffic jam and take 20 minutes or 15 minutes to get out afterwards when I can be in and out someplace else? So
Yeah.
everybody's different.
And I think it's fun because you said a line, I still remember it. It was in that docu-series they put out on, Southeast just this last month with the Move series, and you said a line in it when you pretty much said, "There might be people who would say I'd never step foot
Oh,
in
yeah, yeah,
Southeast,
yeah,
but we'll come to you." And
yeah.
I don't wanna butcher
If,
the line.
yeah, that became a rallying cry for us. See, I'll cry just thinking about it because that was the line that we all kind of latched onto. I think it was the long version of it
Mhm.
was saying, people will say, I would never go to that church. I'd never go to that big church. Or I'd never go to Southeast. And I said, that's okay. We'll come to you, and we'll come to your region. We'll come to your area, and we'll serve you, and we'll love you, and we'll be Christ to you. And the concept behind it was that if a person from Indiana comes and visits with someone, they might have really good experience, but they'll say, no, the service was an hour and 10 minutes from when I left my house. It was a 3 hour commitment.
Mhm.
And so a person who's a fringe person who is investigating Christianity, they're not going to invest that 3 hours,
Mhm.
but they might uh, if they lived 5 minutes or 10 minutes away. And so the concept was it's an easier invite. The whole purpose of multi-site campuses are not to placate the members and make it easier for them. It's to make it easier to invite people.
Mm.
So now that person, the bar is a little bit lower. It's an hour and a half commitment for them. to come check it out. And that's kind of the genius behind it. I
Mm.
don't know if you know how multi-site campuses really started coming about.
Mm-mm.
Greg Rochelle's the pastor of the largest church, Life Church,
yeah.
in Oklahoma. I don't know how many campuses there are now, maybe 70 or 80. But it started when his wife was pregnant. He had preached on a Saturday night for Saturday night worship. She went into labor, and it was a great service at night. And so the elders are saying, what are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do tomorrow? It's not fair for us to ask Craig to preach while his wife may have just had a baby or will still be in labor. And so they said, well, it was a great message tonight. So they said, well, maybe we could play the video. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So they played the video on Sunday morning. It was equally powerful, the message that he shared. And that's when the genius began of trying to think outside the box, of them saying, what if we were to do this in other locations and use what was done on Saturday night? And that's kind of how multi-site started.
That's pretty cool. And you go back to the risk of it on it. Most people I sit down with, it's the entrepreneur. I can't say it.
I can't.
As an entrepreneur,
Hey, you really are my son, because I was trying to say that.
no
the other
DNA
day.
test needed. We both can't say entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hey, is that really your son? I promise you. Entrepreneurship. Isn't that a word too? Entrepreneurship. I think it's like a program, or sounds like you're cussing, but anyway. Yeah.
But yes, most people sit down. That's the reward is financial, and I think obviously as believers, the reward of saying the amount of people who've come to Christ based on a risk that not obviously just you took, obviously the elders, obviously the staff,
Yes,
obviously
yes.
every person preaching, obviously the Lord and the Holy Spirit leaning in heavily in people watering the seeds, but the initial risk that was Holy Spirit led of you diving in and saying, let's go multi-site, let's take the risk, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have been baptized, been plugged in, been spiritually fed at a multi-site campus, that the comfortable thing for you would have been, hey, this whole Blankenbaker thing's great. We're filling up the third balcony. People are coming. I think that's the cool side, is we sit here with a lot of business risk. I'll change the word business risk, but in the grand scheme of things, business risk doesn't matter in heaven. And the thing that matters in heaven is people who've put their faith in Christ, and you going to that mindset and that model opened up the doors for a lot more people to have easy invites and do that. So pretty cool.
Can I throw something in on that? Because I'm thinking when Bob Russell graciously handed things over to me when I was 44 years old, and he was 62, he could have stayed for another 5 years and church would have done great and church would have grown. But instead he passed it off to me. And I found out a few years later, I was reading a study that was done. I can't remember if it was in the Harvard Business Review or where it was, but it talks about the older you get, the more risk aversive you become. And so as a result, when you start out and you're in your 40s, there are leadership risks that a person's willing to take that in their 50s and 60s they won't. And also, the longer you're at an organization and the larger it gets, the less likely you are to take those risks, because you got a good thing going. And so you start to play it safe. You know, you ever watch we watched this in March Madness in the last few weeks, because what happens is a team will get a lead, they'll be up 10 or 11 points, and now they start playing cautious. And they stop the style of play that they've had that's done them so well. You see it with football as well. And they pull back and they play it safe, and they don't take chances. And sometimes you end up with a team that comes up like Houston and beats Duke because they outscore them 11-1 in the last minute and 14 seconds.
We were texting during that game. Our favorite thing is if we can't watch a game together, texting during a game. And you were on a flight, I think, right?
Yes, and I couldn't watch it. They didn't have TVs. And so that night, you're giving me play-by-play and telling me scores back and forth. I hopped off that plane and hopped on my phone as quickly as I could. And but yeah, so what happens is, you know, you take that risk. You're more prone to take that risk when you're younger and when you're new to an organization. And I do think that there are spiritual risks that grow out of the risks that we take as God just kind of grows us and matures us to the point of saying, you know what, do you trust me? He's
Mhm.
up there saying, do you trust me? And sometimes it might be a risk that is business related. And other times it's one that's a spiritual risk, whether it's sharing your faith with a coworker, having the courage to invite someone to come to a worship service. Maybe it's just having a spiritual conversation with
Mm.
them. And all of those things are risks that uh, reveal whether or not we truly have accepted Jesus as our Lord and Savior. It might get us out of our comfort zone,
Mhm.
but if we truly say, okay, He's the master, He's calling the shots in my life, and then we're not willing to boldly say a good word on His behalf, then I wonder the disconnect that He must think as He looks at us and says, okay, they claim that I'm number one in their life. They'll tell anybody about their allegiance to the Louisville Cardinals, or they'll tell anybody about whatever the new thing is that they're excited about. When you and I got excited about cold plunges, or
Mhm.
whatever the hoverboard. Remember our hoverboard era that you and I went through?
That was a risk.
Oh, that was a risk. But it
Flying
was a
around on
fun.
those things.
It was a fun one, man. We'd do time trials around a church, around the office area. I had a course mapped out, and you and I, we put the times
Oh,
up on the
yeah.
board. Remember that?
I remember when you'd text me. I can't remember who beat me, but I had the record for a while. And I
Dude,
mean, we went on, it was like it felt like a half-mile loop. We would do this huge loop all the way around, and we were cooking. That was
unbelievable.
fun.
And I taught Dave Ramsey to hoverboard. And
Yeah.
he was one of my better students. I'll
That's
never
funny.
forget it because you remember we kept his time up there
Oh,
for a
yeah.
while. He had never hoverboarded in his life, and he picked it up so quickly. But the reason he picked it up, I found out later, he told me, he said he loves to water ski. And we got talking, and he said, at dinner, he said, I actually barefoot
Oh,
water
well,
ski. I'm like, well, dude, that's why you're so good with the feet and all that. But then in front of his whole staff, we're in the back room. He was doing an all-day seminar or something at church. We're in the back room, and he comes flying in to show off in front of all of them, and he takes a nosedive
Yeah.
in front of the staff. It was, yeah. But we got some great hoverboard memories.
That's funny.
That's
Yeah,
risk.
I remember you saying he like bought him right there. He was like, when I got
Yeah.
home, I had 3 of them waiting on me. Put him on his credit
He
card.
did. He did. He had.
Just kidding, not his credit card. It was a debit card, I'm sure. But yeah, I think, and one thing I really wanted to hit on that I feel like risk wise, as we walked through, if you're a member of Southeast this last month or 2 months, was the Move series on
Yeah.
radical generosity for 2 years of radical generosity, which Kyle Idleman's leading people through in order to change the next 2 generations, is what he calls it. And I think
Yeah.
the one thing I'm excited to chat with you on is the risk of generosity as a believer, and the risk of putting generosity first in your life, and saying, hey, Christ, like you just hit on, I'm going to trust you with my finances rather than just trusting you with my Sunday afternoon or my Sunday morning. And that's something that, from seeing behind the curtain, watching the way you operate and the way you live, I see generosity being extremely important to you. I see it being obviously a huge portion of your life. And if you're listening to this and you've met my dad, you've probably been blessed by him being generous in some way to you. So I'd love to hear you talk about that and what that risk looks like, because no matter what,
Hmm.
it's always a risk to say that you're going to give money or give time or give your talent somewhere.
Well, I was very fortunate because it was modeled for me by my dad and my mom, and they were both very generous, and they would give anonymously to things that no one knew about, and it meant so much to me to see them just share with others. And I'm telling you what, Sam, uh, they would use my brother, Uncle Jeff, and I as carrier pigeons. They would put money in an envelope. And when we were in college, they said, I want you to slide this under this professor's door. I want you to get this on this person's desk when nobody's around. And you do it anyway. They didn't care, but they just wanted to remain anonymous.
Mhm.
So the excitement that we felt of them pulling us in on that was so much fun for us that we kind of caught the spirit. My brother is one of the most generous people that I know, and so I think that anytime you're giving to a church or giving to a cause or just really living a life of generosity, it goes beyond just okay, are we going to earmark this to give to a church or to this particular ministry, or beyond the tithe, the 10%. And what you find is the more you do it, it becomes something that's really fun, and you realize that you're going to be okay. God's going to provide for you. I never dreamed I would be in it. My goal was to preach at a church for 30 years and be at the same church and to grow it to 500 people. That was my goal when I graduated from Bible college. And I don't want to get wrapped up in numbers, but there's a passage in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20 and 21, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. And so what I found was my whole time in church was a generosity journey. And because the church I was a part of at Southeast was constantly growing and outgrowing things. And so it stretched me, and it stretched me at a really pivotal time. And it was a time when you were not born yet. And, we lived in a 1,100 square foot home, no basement. And we loved it there, and we were there for years. And you were born and there until you were 3.5 years old. But, the possessions don't become the priority. The priority is, how can we get the gospel to more people? And every time we felt like we made some major sacrifice financially, it's like God was saying, okay, all right, I know what you're going to do with what I give you, so I'm going to entrust more to you. I've got to be very careful, because it's not a give to get concept. It's really just teaching you to release and to let go of it. And to say, okay, Lord, I trust you. I trust that you will meet my needs regardless of what I have.
Yeah, and I think I look back at, it's funny, you talk about the story about Dado. I still remember times when you handed me money at Cal in a yellow envelope, and you would say, you gave me $500 one time and said, give this to a teacher. And I was in high school, and I remember I thought it was the coolest thing. And I went to a teacher on their put it on their desk.
Wow.
And I remember walking in the next day,
remember that.
and I think only I knew about it. I don't think anybody else obviously did. And I remember he had erased his whole board and just wrote on it. I don't know if I ever told you this. He just wrote on it to the yellow envelope person, thank you. And somebody like in our class sits there, and it was a Bible teacher and guy, and who had meant a lot to me. And yeah, it sticks out in my brain, because I remember somebody in my class raised their hand and was like, hey, what does that mean? He was like, to the right person, it means something.
Really?
And so in the same way that
I
Dado
don't remember
modeled it
that,
for
but
you.
what a
Yeah, it's
But so many people do things. You experienced it. You saw how people would do things for us, and people were generous to us in so many different ways. We made a financial commitment one time. We thought, okay, we're not going to take a vacation for 2 years. We're not going to be able to afford. We're just not going to take a vacation. And then out of the blue, some guy that I'd never met let us go to Gatlinburg and stay.
Is that when I fell off the? Remember the?
Oh yeah,
Is that what it was?
Ober Gatlinburg on the thing that we rode down the
Yes.
thing.
What is that called?
It's like a slide, but it was on
It's like a
cement.
slide, but it was concrete, and it was like,
Yes.
again, you fly on those things, and at a
dude,
turn, I like slipped off.
You
or
remember?
something.
I think I made you promise not to tell Mom. And,
Sorry if you're listening, Mom. She is a listener.
Oh, you took
I'm okay
a
now.
bad fall.
Can't say entrepreneurship or whatever. That's probably what started it.
Man, you took a bad fall. I got you back on the thing with me. Oh, I'll never forget that. Yes, but that's where we went, and we got to stay there for free. So
The medical bills were a little higher, but I think there's one thing you do that I think you still do. I know you do it sometime. I've seen is, and we were talking about it in Man Challenge last week at my table on.
I'm curious to see what this is going to be.
The sheet you have. Here's what we've given, which I don't look at your
yeah.
sheet, but you've told me about it. Here's what we've we've given or
Yeah.
gifted to people,
Yeah.
and then on the flip side,
Yeah.
what people have done for us. And it's talk about that a little bit if you're okay
It's,
with that. Again, I didn't clear any
call
of
it
this past you, so
I call it a heavenly portfolio or a spiritual portfolio. So we don't do the best job. Mom was just saying the other day, you're not keeping track of everything that you're just handing or giving, for people, but I keep a list of it. And, so if you give $100 to this waitress, or you give however much for this person going through this single mom was this past weekend, whatever it might be, we put that on a list in my iPad. And then we just wait and see the things that God pops up.
mhm.
And we put them on the other side. And, all I can say is I just did it for 2024 because I was looking back over it because I was doing some tax stuff. And of course, none of this is tax stuff that I'm talking about on these things or deductible stuff. But the amount that God blessed us with was, it was like 6 or 7 times over.
Mm.
And they were all unexpected. It's all crazy things. You got to remember, if God can create this universe and make it as spectacular as he did, and he can make the human body as fascinating as it is, then is it really a challenge for him to come up with creative ways to uh, give us resources to meet our needs?
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm amazed when I look back at that list at the creative things. You remember that time when I think I sent it to all 3 of you, to Savannah, Sadie, and to you, back from a capital campaign at church in the 1990s. And I didn't show what Mom and I gave, but I showed the blessings that came out
Yeah,
of
a
it.
couple years back you said that. I
Oh,
remember that.
my
Yeah.
word. Just because I wanted you, if I were to drop dead, I wanted you all to have that just so that you could
Mhm.
see how faithful God is. It's generosity teaches you God's faithfulness, and it becomes a story in and of itself of how God provides for your needs. We didn't know how we were going to get Sadie to pay for Sadie to go to the college she was going to go to. And we just watched God bring
Mm.
the money, and always through unexpected ways.
Mm.
So,
It's cool. I think the excited part about sitting down with you is just that risk looks different for everybody. And I know some people who listen to the podcast, it's easy to sit down and there's a person here who started insurance business that's blown up with 2,000 agents, and then a health business,
Roger.
and then and then the former governor of Kentucky. And people sit there and go, okay, like this is not what risk looks like for me in my life. But I think it's challenging to where, obviously, if you're a believer, risk is something that we're called to do. And I think it's something that we're called to, step out of our comfort zone. And it's a risk just to say, my life's going to be led by the Holy Spirit. And it's not going to be everyone's call to risk by the Holy Spirit. It's going to be something different. But I know when I feel like I'm living a Spirit-led life, it's not a life of sitting on my hands and sitting back and just doing the monotonous thing, but it's having risky conversations. It's reaching out to people. It's getting out of my comfort zone. And so I think that it's cool for people who don't sit here and say, hey, I think I'm going to go start a business that I'm going to try to grow as big as possible, to sit and say, we're still called to risk in our lives, and there's risk for all of us to take.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the fact, as we talk about risk, we've been talking about generosity. I'm reminded of the fact that every time I felt that prompting from the Holy Spirit, a person who's not a believer would say, my conscience just kind of told me this. Well, I think in the life of the believer, the Holy Spirit will just kind of prompt you on things. And sometimes it's bizarre. It's out of your comfort zone. It's strange. It's awkward. Every time I followed through on those promptings, I've gotten some confirmation from the person that, oh, you have no idea the timing of this. And I could tell you story after story of just Just 3 weeks ago, we're done. I don't know if I can tell the story, but a young couple, and we were able to, I said one line to them. Sam, I said one line to them. And here's this young couple, and they're both looking at me. And I say one line, and immediately both of them have crocodile tears just fill up their eyes with tears running down their cheeks. And mom's around the side, and she's wondering what's going on. What did dad say to cause these two people to cry immediately? But I just took a burden away with one line, because I felt that prompting to do that. And then they spend their next few minutes just confirming of, oh, you have no idea what you just did, you know? And so my point is, sometimes risks are from that prompting of the Spirit that gets you out of your comfort zone. And it might seem awkward, but if you go for it, you always end up with some type of confirmation, maybe not immediate, but that, you know what, I did what I needed to do. And it's not that you're going to get something in return, and it's not that even they'll be appreciative. Sometimes they're not appreciative. That's okay, you know, because you've been true to what God laid on your heart, and their response, you know, has nothing to do with whether or not you act on it. So.
It reminds me of that ice cream story of the hotel that you tell, or the Wendy's Frosty
Oh,
story.
gosh, yeah. That's
It's,
exactly right. Yeah. She was not super appreciative, but mom did a good job of teaching me that, yeah, but that's not why we give. It's not a gift. If my giving or my serving is contingent upon the response that I'm going to get from that person, then it's not a gift. It's self-exaltation, and it's trying to look good to other people. And instead, my job is just to be obedient. And, you know, as Christians, that's what our job is. And so, yes, giving might come more naturally for me than maybe serving or some other area of some other spiritual discipline, you know, fasting or praying. So I think we can sometimes camp out in our comfort zone, and God will stretch us in these other ones, and we have to be willing to take those steps of faith.
That's fun. Any big risk on the horizon for you? Maybe I know about them, maybe I don't, but obviously starting your podcast was a step out in faith. And then obviously just transferring from a role to where, in the same way you said Bob finished at Southeast before his time was, but when he definitely had years left, you did a very similar thing in saying, 2019, stepping back from that role, and you travel and preach now 2 to 3 weekends a month. And I get to see you at least once a week. Usually we get to hang out and do something fun, but you do travel a lot and do that. So what's on the horizon for you, and tell us about what the season looks like.
Yeah, I'd say the podcast is probably the new risk, because doing it weekly is
it's harder than you think, isn't it?
Is a challenge. And all of a sudden, you know, I try to have 3 in the hopper and stay ahead, but it's labor intensive and it's time consuming. But what I get out of it is I enjoy it. That's why I like your podcast so much, is because I get something from every single person that you've had as a guest. Were any of them pastors? No. Were any of them in Christian leadership? No. But every one of them has had things that were helpful for me as a leader and just as a person. And it gets you thinking outside the box. So I'd say the podcast, the weekly podcast, is a big risk for me. But, you know, I think of coming in here, I was thinking about different seasons in my life of different risks. You know, my junior year of high school, I ran for senior class president. So I'm like, you know, you put yourself out there, and when you're an awkward teenager, you know, you're wondering how that's going to go, but you put yourself out there. I think of,
Did you win?
I did, or I wouldn't be telling the story. You really think I would have brought it up if I lost? No, I've had plenty of risks that have backfired on me.
What was your biggest policy you implemented in senior year of high school?
I started a group called the Hoopsters, and it was a cheering section for basketball games. Can't believe you're asking this. No one's ever asked. And basically, it was a ploy for us to get out of class. Because if you were part of an elective group, I got a guy to be the sponsor. I got a teacher
That was a
to be the
Stone
sponsor.
specialty, getting out
Oh,
of
dude.
class.
Once again, the DNA test. The apple don't fall far from the tree. So we actually called the group of hoopsters. I got T-shirts printed up for us. We wore them for the ball games. I said we have to get together for half an hour every 2 weeks to practice the cheers that we're going to do as a cheering section. So that's what we did. I had officers in the group. We had over 200 students.
It's really tough stuff.
Well, we didn't have a lot of rhythm. So, but it was awesome. It got us out of class, and I get people to sign up for it, and they say, well, what exactly do we do? I said, get out of class for 30 minutes every 2 weeks. I'm in. We have our picture we have the picture of the entire Hoopsters group. We stole the choir robes for the officers, and we wore robes and stood in the front row, the officers. Yeah. So anyway, that was the senior class risk. But there's different seasons. I think about the risk that Southeast took on me when they hired me 36 years ago, because I was 27 years old and I'd never had a preaching ministry in my life. And they hired me to share the preaching. So Bob Russell took a huge risk. I'm sure there are people scratching their heads saying, why are we hiring this guy? There weren't teaching teams then. But yeah, the multi-sites, that was a big risk. And, I don't know if you ever know this, you were a risk. I wanted 2 kids. You're number 3. You are well aware of that.
I am.
I wanted 2 kids because that's what I came from, a home with 2 kids. Mom had 5 kids, so she wanted more. And so we went back and forth, and, my struggles with workaholism, I'm like, I don't know if I'm giving enough quality time to 2, let alone what would I do if I had a 3rd? And it was right when the church was in the building program, and we were starting the building program for Blankenbaker campus. And I was the relocation project leader from the staff. And so I'm thinking I'm not going to have enough time if we have a 3rd child. And I'll never forget, we prayed about it. Mom prayed about it. She got a quick answer. Yes. And I didn't get that answer as quickly, but this is what Mom said. She said, I don't want to drive past that church building. And every time I drive past it, resent the church. Because we didn't have a 3rd child, because you were working so many hours there. And I had an answer for everything, but I didn't have an answer for that one. And that made a lot of sense to me. You don't ask a person that's got, how many kids, are you glad you had your last? Who's going to say, no, we should have stopped with Johnny, I don't know why we had Susie. No one is ever going to say, if they got 7 kids, if they're Tim Hester with 12 kids, nobody's ever going to say, yeah, we should have stopped at 11, that 12, no, nobody's going to say that. So you can't ask people that question. And when she said that to me, that's the one that really hit me. And I'm glad.
Thanks for making me cry on the podcast. I am glad you had the 3rd kid.
You knew I would cry.
I hope Kathleen, Rhodes, and Wilder are all grateful to you for that one.
Yeah. And, I look back at that and how you have you completed our family in such a great way. And I loved having girls with Savannah and Sadie first. And I was content if you would have been a girl, but boy, when that doctor said it's a boy and I named you after my dad, that was a moment. And it's a closeness that fathers and sons can have that can carry on into adulthood. The friendship stage starts when they're around 20 if you've done things right. And we've been the best of friends.
Yeah. I told somebody that the other day. I said, because we moved back to Louisville in 2020, and I'm trying to think how old I would have been. 25 then. And it was fun. I told somebody, it was like when we moved back to Louisville, it went from, we moved in with you guys, so thank you for that. But it I truly felt like we became
No, yeah.
best friends then, and it was like, and I kind of say it to people, and they're like, "Oh wow, nobody really gets to say they're
Uh,
best friends with their dad," and that's been this season's been so fun. Of just we obviously live closer to each other now, and we used to live with each other, so we see each other a lot. We get to hang out a lot, and
yeah.
it's been so much fun. So
You're a real blessing, as Savannah and Sadie are as well. And
you don't have to
uh,
add that part in there. You can just say I'm a real blessing without the caveat.
well, you never know; they might have a new podcast.
I don't
too,
think they listen. Sadie or Savannah, if you're listening to this, shoot me a text right now and say, "Hey, I'm listening." And the first sister to text and say, "I'm listening," will win a prize.
$20. I'll put
There you
20
go.
bucks.
I'll do
up.
20. We'll do $40.
Okay.
If you are a friend of Sadie and Savannah, you cannot text them this segment and say, "Go listen at this point." So that'll be the
Yes,
the
please don't
boost
do
for
that.
Sadie or
We just want to
Savannah
test the waters.
to see who listens to this podcast first.
Who loves us more?
Yeah, Savannah definitely listens. She runs and listens to it, and I know Sadie will probably watch the whole thing first. Savannah will listen to it in spurts. So Savannah might start first, but I think Sadie might finish it
But
first.
Sadie will take notes on it.
Sadie.
Sadie will have notes and say, "I love what you said at the 7:16 point."
So sweet.
Hey, I don't think I've ever told you of what I felt.
I
like
love
was
these
my,
stories. These are great.
My biggest leadership risk. These are stories I haven't shared. I think I shared this one time, but I didn't tell it that it was me. But years ago, Southeast sent me to a leadership program. They announced I was going to be replacing Bob Russell. And so now this congregation got scared to death. Oh, we got this knucklehead that's going to become the pastor, and he's the funny guy, and we're going to follow him. What's he know about leadership? So they sent me to this leadership program, and they had to talk their way to get me in. It was with a Christian Management Association, and it was 25 CEOs of large ministry organizations or nonprofits. And they said, "Hey, this guy's going to be our lead pastor in a couple of years, and we'd love for him to be part of this." It was basically a mini MBA program. And so I went to it, and I mean, Sambo, you talk about feeling like a fish out of water. Here's these 25 CEOs. I was one of the younger ones in the group, maybe the youngest. And we started off at the Center for Creative Leadership in Colorado Springs. I'd never done so many tests beforehand, and inventories and personality tests and risk aversion tests. I mean, you name it. And we did it. We did 360s with staff about me. So they're all sharing their thoughts. They had
All positive.
Oh, yes, yes. No, not quite, which is good. They were honest.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I've ever told you this, but they had, on the last day, they said, "You're going to spend 4 hours with a psychologist who has studied all of your tests." I'm like, man, I'll be bored to death after 30 minutes, But that was going to be on the last day. Well, on the second day or the third day, the person leading it from out there in Colorado Springs for that section said, "Okay, I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes. I'm going to start a timer right here. You pick a leader from your group, and then we'll start back in 5 minutes." Well, everybody's sitting around, and just kind of didn't know what. No one wanted to say it or do it, and it was an awkward silence for all of these Type A driven leaders. And dude, I felt my heart pound within me. And it was like I was hearing this voice saying, you need to take charge of this. You need to take charge of this. So, the most unlikely person in the group, I walked up to the front of the room, and it got real quiet. And I grabbed a magic marker. They had a whiteboard up there. I said, "Okay, we need to pick a leader. It won't be me. It will be one of you. Give me some nominations. We've got 2 minutes and 12 seconds left on the timer, and we got to do this." And 2 or 3 different names came up. I said, "Okay, you interested in this? You interested in this?" And then they voted, and then got their person. And then I sat down. So I didn't think a whole lot about it. The next day, all the psychologists come in the room, and we think it's their first time to see us.
Mm-hmm.
But for 3 days, the wall that we thought was a glass wall was actually them on the other side. It was a two-way mirror.
Mhm.
And they had watched.
And Practical Joker style
They-
too.
exactly.
You remember that?
Exactly.
They turned the screen
Yes,
off.
yes. Exactly like that. Only these guys, these psychologists
Yeah.
are not practical jokers.
They weren't dancing behind it.
They weren't. So sure enough, they say, we want to talk about the leadership moment
Mm.
of the entire retreat. And they said it was when Dave Stone walked up there. They said that was a leadership moment.
Mm.
And what that did for me, an insecure, fearful guy who was going to be following a legend, I can't tell you what that did for me,
Mm.
because I'm like, well, maybe I've got this gift. Maybe I can do
Mm.
it. And here I went there so unlikely, feeling like a fish out of water, feeling insecure, like I don't know if I have the chops to do this
Mm.
job. And God used that moment by prompting me to step up there. And yeah, so there are those moments. There have been other risks that have backfired where it didn't go as well. I think back to my transition of just things that I should have gotten together with our senior adults more when I took over the lead. 44-year-old guy following a 62-year-old guy. I should have gotten our senior adults together
Mhm.
so that I could just answer the questions and concerns that they had. I can remember in real estate getting too far along, and we had a couple of wins with real estate and some rental properties, and so I started feeling my oats, and so I started taking bigger risks than I should have,
Mhm.
and then that's when the entire market crashed in 2008, and all of a sudden I had a lot of debt, and that was a time where it was too much risk because I took a risk that actually backfired on me. That had done well for 2 or 3 times.
That's why we ate rice and beans for those years.
We did.
We made it through.
Raymond noodles.
I'm healthy.
Raymond noodles.
But, well, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for sitting down. I knew you kind of had to say yes to sitting down with me at some point. So thank you. The people who continually ask when is your dad going to be on the podcast? I can now just send them this episode. And so I'm honored, thankful that you're my dad, thankful that I've seen a good model of just the way you've led and lived, and thankful for your leadership and role model in my life. So
Well,
love you.
Love you too. Let me say one thing real quickly. I appreciate the fact that that you're doing this. I appreciate the risk you've taken. One of your biggest risks was saying, I feel like God's calling me into real estate, and how God has blessed that in the ways that you have these opportunities to minister that you never could minister to people, to some people, in the way that you do if you were in a full-time Christian vocation. And I see such a value of people who are in the marketplace and they're using their job to be salt and light and to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And I couldn't be more proud of you. And I want your listeners to know this guy and I talk about every single day. And I don't think we've ever ended a phone call without us both saying, I love you. So
Yeah.
it's pretty cool.
Don't make me cry again. Good night.
Yeah.
Thank you for being on. Love you, and excited for people to hear this one. So
Thanks.
Thanks,
Love you,
sir.
bud.